The air in the Brooklyn federal courtroom was thick with a tension that felt ancient, a familiar weight in the long war against the narcos. On December 3, 2018, the witness stand was occupied by a figure who seemed more like a specter from a horror film than a man. Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, known by the chillingly playful moniker Chupeta or Lollipop, sat before the jury. He was a ghost from Colombia's most violent era, the former leader of the fearsome North Valley Cartel. His presence was a calculated move by the prosecution, a weapon aimed directly at the heart of the man sitting at the defense table, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. For 17 years, these two men had been partners in a bloody, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Now, one was here to bury the other. Chupeta was not just any witness. He was a kingpin in his own right, a titan of the cocaine trade who had once commanded a global empire. He explained to the court that his organization was responsible for smuggling an astonishing 400,000 kilos of cocaine into the United States, a river of white powder that flowed north with ruthless efficiency. He was El Chapo's primary supplier, the source of the product that Guzman's Sinaloa Cartel moved with legendary speed and brutality. The arrangement was simple, but immensely profitable. Chupeta provided the merchandise from the jungles of Colombia, and El Chapo, the master logistician, guaranteed its passage through Mexico and across the American border. Theirs was a symbiosis built on greed and sealed in blood. The jurors stared, captivated and perhaps horrified, as Chupeta began to speak. His voice, steady and devoid of overt emotion, narrated a history of unimaginable wealth and violence. He was one of the fourth major cooperating witnesses, a man who had turned on his former ally in exchange for a chance at a lesser sentence. He was a monster testifying against another monster, a serpent offering to expose the secrets of the viper's nest. The prosecution needed him to connect the dots, to provide a first-hand account of the intricate machinery of the international drug trade. He was the man who kept the receipts, the one who knew exactly how the bodies were buried and how the billions were made. His testimony was a journey into the dark heart of cartel operations. He spoke of a world where loyalty was a commodity and betrayal was a constant threat. As the former head of the North Valley Cartel, he wielded absolute power, a position he admitted could only be maintained through unceasing violence. He was a man who had orchestrated wars, bribed governments, and ordered the deaths of hundreds. Now, in this sterile, climate-controlled room, he was laying bare the inner workings of that world for a jury of ordinary citizens. The stakes were impossibly high for El Chapo, for the United States government, and for Chupeta himself, whose life depended on the credibility of his chilling tale. The most striking thing about Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia was not his testimony, but his face. It was a grotesque mask, a canvas of surgical alterations that had melted his features into something barely human. Jurors could not look away from the tight, pulled skin, the unnaturally angled cheekbones, the narrowed eyes and the sharpened chin. He looked like a ghoul, a man whose very identity had been sliced away. This was the work of at least 4 extensive plastic surgeries, a desperate and extreme measure to evade capture. He had earned another nickname, the Man of 1,000 Faces. He told the court he had changed his jawline, his cheekbones, his eyes, his mouth, his ears, and his nose. He was a phantom, constantly shifting his appearance to stay one step ahead of the global manhunt that pursued him. Before his arrest in a luxurious Brazilian apartment in 2007, Chupeta had lived as a fugitive, a billionaire ghost haunting the shadows of South America. The surgeries were not just about vanity. They were a critical tool for survival in a world where his face was his death warrant. He was one of the most wanted men on the planet, and his original image was plastered on posters across continents. To continue running his empire, he had to become unrecognizable. The transformation was so profound that authorities had to use voice recognition technology to confirm his identity upon his capture. His face was a testament to his paranoia and his determination to never be caught, a living monument to the lengths a narco kingpin would go to preserve his freedom and his power. The prosecutor, Andrea Goldberg, guided him through the story of his physical transformation, ensuring the jury understood the context. This was not a man hiding from a minor crime. This was a man who commanded a criminal organization so vast and violent that he needed to literally carve away his own identity to stay alive. The surgeries were a business expense, a necessary investment in his continued operation as a trafficker. Each cut of the surgeon's scalpel was a strategic move in his personal war against law enforcement. The resulting visage, tight and distorted, was the price he paid for a few more years at the helm of his cocaine dynasty, a chilling visual aid for the jury of the extreme world he inhabited. El Chapo, sitting just feet away, watched his former partner with an unreadable expression. He saw the man who had supplied him with endless tons of cocaine, now a warped caricature of his former self. Chupeta's face was a story in itself, a narrative of fear, power, and the desperate flight from justice. It told the jury everything they needed to know about the life of a cartel leader. It was a life lived in the crosshairs, where one's own face becomes a liability. The man on the stand was not just a witness. He was a living exhibit of the consequences of a life drenched in crime, a man who had mutilated himself to outrun the ghost that now filled the courtroom. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the testimony turned from business to blood. Chupeta, with the same dispassionate tone he used to describe cocaine shipments, began to detail his personal history of violence. He calmly admitted to the jury that he had ordered a minimum of 150 murders during his reign as the leader of the North Valley Cartel. The number was delivered as a matter of fact, an operational statistic from a bygone era. He made no apologies, offering instead a chillingly pragmatic justification for his actions. "It's impossible to be a leader of a cartel in Colombia without violence," he stated, his distorted face betraying no remorse. For him, murder was not a sin but a tool, an essential function of management in the brutal ecosystem of the drug trade. He did not stop at ordering deaths from a distance. The prosecution pressed him for details, and he obliged, recounting an instance where he took matters into his own hands. He spoke of a man named Rodriguez, a rival, or perhaps a subordinate who had crossed the line. Chupeta described looking the man in the eyes before personally shooting him in the face. The confession was stark and brutal, painting a picture of a leader who was not just a strategist, but also a hands-on executioner. He wanted the jury to understand the reality of his world. Leadership was demonstrated through the willingness to kill, and mercy was a weakness that would get you killed. His confession was a masterclass in the cold logic of cartel power. The prosecutor methodically walked him through his plea agreement with the United States, made in 2010 after his extradition from Brazil. He had pleaded guilty to murder and trafficking charges, and in exchange for his cooperation against other high-level figures like El Chapo, he hoped to receive a reduced sentence of 25 years. This was the deal with the devil the government had made. To catch a kingpin like Guzman, they had to rely on the testimony of a mass murderer, a man whose hands were stained with the blood of countless victims. Chupeta's presence on the stand was a stark reminder of the compromised morality required to prosecute the drug war at its highest levels. As he spoke, the scale of his violent enterprise became terrifyingly clear. The 150 murders were, by his own admission, a minimum. He acknowledged that the true number could be far higher. He was a man who had built an empire on a foundation of corpses, a CEO whose business model included assassination as a standard operating procedure. His testimony was designed to show the jury that the world El Chapo inhabited was one of casual brutality, where life was cheap and power was everything. Chupeta was the embodiment of that world, a living testament to the violence that fueled the flow of cocaine from his labs to American streets. The list of victims grew longer as the testimony continued, each name a ghost summoned into the courtroom. Chupeta's memory for murder was as sharp as his memory for drug ledgers. He recounted specific hits with unnerving detail, transforming abstract numbers into concrete, brutal acts. He spoke of ordering the execution of a rival cartel member, a hit that was not limited to the target alone. To ensure its success, the operation also eliminated the man's entire 12-person security detail. It was a display of overwhelming force, a message to all who would dare to challenge the North Valley Cartel's dominance. The courtroom listened as he described the calculated slaughter, a business decision executed with military precision. The violence was not reserved for men in the game. Chupeta admitted to ordering the deaths of 2 women who were investigating the cartel's activities near Cali, Colombia. They were executed for simply doing their jobs, for getting too close to the truth. He also confessed to having an attorney killed, a man who had the fatal flaw of talking too much when he was drunk. In Chupeta's world, any perceived risk, any potential leak was neutralized with absolute finality. There were no second chances. He recounted the murder of a man named Canoso, who was shot for stealing a mere $2 million, a pittance in an operation that generated billions. Every killing reinforced the same brutal rule. Disloyalty, incompetence, or even carelessness was punishable by death. His reach extended far beyond the borders of Colombia, a fact the prosecution was keen to establish. Chupeta's testimony directly implicated him in violence on American soil, bringing the war home for the Brooklyn jury. He admitted to ordering the murder of Vladimir Begelman, who was gunned down in Brooklyn on December 2, 1993. He followed this with a confession to a horrific triple homicide in Fort Lee, New Jersey in 1994. The victims were Lucieni Correa Quintana, her husband, and her son, all executed on his command. These were not distant killings in a foreign land. They were assassinations carried out just a few miles from the courthouse, a chilling demonstration of the cartel's global power and its utter disregard for human life. Each confession was a hammer blow, building a case not only against Chupeta himself, but by extension, against the man he did business with. The prosecution's strategy was clear: to immerse the jury in the culture of extreme violence that defined El Chapo's world. Chupeta was the tour guide to this hellscape, a man who spoke of murder with the detached air of a factory manager discussing production quotas. He was proving his own monstrousness, but in doing so, he was also painting a vivid picture of the man who had been his trusted partner for nearly 2 decades. The message was simple: this is the kind of man El Chapo chose as his main supplier. The foundation of the relationship between Chupeta and El Chapo was pure business, a partnership that flooded the United States with cocaine for 17 years. Chupeta described their arrangement to the jury with the precision of a seasoned executive. He was the producer, the master of the Colombian cocaine pipeline, and El Chapo was his premier distributor. Guzman's Sinaloa Cartel was the logistical key that unlocked the lucrative American market. For his services, El Chapo didn't receive a flat fee. Instead, he took a massive 40% cut of all the cocaine he successfully moved into the United States. This revenue-sharing model made Guzman a true partner, incentivizing him to ensure the product reached its destination safely and swiftly. Chupeta portrayed himself as a hands-on manager obsessed with quality control. He referred to the product as my cocaine and explained the great lengths he went to ensure its optimum purity. This was not just about pride, it was about brand reputation. A superior product fetched a higher price and solidified his status as the supplier of choice. He was meticulous, debriefing his pilots after every drug run to analyze their performance, identify weaknesses in their routes, and refine their methods. This obsessive attention to detail was a hallmark of his operation, transforming a criminal conspiracy into a highly efficient, vertically integrated global enterprise. He ran his cartel like a Fortune 500 company, with El Chapo as his most important client. The evolution of their smuggling methods demonstrated their adaptability in the face of increased law enforcement pressure. Initially, Chupeta testified, they relied almost exclusively on airplanes. Fast, custom-fitted jets would fly from clandestine airstrips in Colombia, cross Central America, and land on hidden runways in the Mexican desert, controlled by the Sinaloa Cartel. However, as U.S. authorities enhanced their radar technology, the skies became too dangerous. The risk of detection and seizure grew, threatening their profits. In response to this new challenge, the partners pivoted their entire operation from the air to the sea, a strategic shift that showcased their criminal ingenuity. The new frontier was the Pacific Ocean. Chupeta explained how they began using unassuming fishing trawlers to move massive quantities of cocaine. These boats would meet El Chapo's vessels in international waters, far from the prying eyes of the Coast Guard. The drugs were transferred at sea, and then ferried to the Mexican coastline. This maritime route was slower but stealthier, allowing them to continue their lucrative trade with reduced risk. This adaptation was a testament to the strength of their partnership. They were not just criminals, they were innovators in their field, constantly evolving their tactics to stay ahead of the law in a deadly game of cat and mouse. While Chupeta's testimony focused on his partnership with El Chapo, it was his reactions to financial losses that truly revealed his character. He could speak of ordering 150 murders with an unnerving calm, his voice never wavering. But when the prosecutor brought up a specific financial blow, the mask of composure cracked. She questioned him about the seizure of two of his drug-laden boats, the Juanita 8 and Juanita 9, by United States authorities in September 2004. These were not just any boats. They were carrying tons of his premium cocaine, a shipment worth tens of millions of dollars. As he recalled the loss, his demeanor shifted dramatically. He became visibly distressed, his voice tight with an emotion he had not shown when confessing to murder. The loss of the Juanitas was more than just a financial setback. It was a personal affront, a puncture in his aura of invincibility. For a man who obsessed over every detail of his operation, the seizure represented a catastrophic failure. The jurors saw a man who was more pained by the loss of his product than by the loss of human life. His priorities were laid bare for all to see. The cocaine was his creation, the tangible symbol of his power and success. The murders were merely a means to protect that creation. Losing the drugs was like losing a part of himself, a blow to his ego that still stung more than a decade later. This moment provided a powerful insight into the narco mindset, where profit and power are the only metrics that matter. Human lives were expendable assets, but the cocaine was the lifeblood of the empire. Chupeta's emotional reaction to the seized shipment was a gift to the prosecution. It humanized him in the worst possible way, revealing a cold, materialistic core. His distress over the lost millions was far more relatable and far more damning to the jury than his detached confessions of violence. It showed them a man whose moral compass was calibrated not to right and wrong, but to profit and loss. This was the man El Chapo chose as his partner. The testimony underscored the immense pressures and constant risks of the trafficking business. Every shipment was a high-stakes gamble. A successful run meant astronomical profits for both Chupeta and El Chapo. A seizure meant not only a massive financial loss, but also a potential intelligence breach that could unravel their entire network. The saga of the Juanita boats illustrated the precarious nature of their enterprise. It was a business of betrayal, not just by informants and rivals, but by fate itself. For a control freak like Chupeta, the randomness of a seizure was an unbearable failure, a wound that festered long after the bodies of his victims had turned to dust. One of the most powerful weapons the prosecution wielded against El Chapo was Chupeta's own meticulousness. The man who ordered murders with casual impunity was also a compulsive bookkeeper. He maintained detailed accounting ledgers that tracked every facet of his sprawling criminal enterprise. These were not simple notebooks. They were sophisticated coded spreadsheets that documented drug shipments, transportation costs, bribery payments, and most chillingly, expenses related to assassinations. In court, these ledgers were presented as evidence, transforming Chupeta's verbal testimony into verifiable fact. The numbers and codes, once the secret language of the North Valley Cartel, were now being deciphered for the jury. The ledgers were a treasure trove for investigators. They provided an undeniable written record of the cartel's operations, detailing the movement of hundreds of tons of cocaine and the flow of billions of dollars. Chupeta confirmed that his records contained notations for killings, admitting it was possible that they documented around 150 separate murders he had ordered. Each entry was a cold, calculated data point in the business of death. The ledgers demonstrated a level of corporate-style organization that was both impressive and horrifying. They were the ultimate proof that for Chupeta, murder was just another line item on a balance sheet, a cost of doing business that needed to be tracked and recorded. The story behind the ledgers added another layer of intrigue and danger to the proceedings. Chupeta testified that the man who prepared these meticulous records, his top lieutenant Laureano Renteria, had been arrested in Colombia. But Renteria would never get the chance to testify. He was poisoned while in a Colombian prison, silenced before he could share what he knew. His murder underscored the lethal stakes of the information contained within the ledgers. These were not just accounting documents, they were death warrants. The fact that Chupeta had preserved them and that they had fallen into the hands of the United States government was a remarkable stroke of luck for the prosecution and a disaster for El Chapo. In the courtroom, the ledger served as Chupeta's silent, irrefutable co-witness. As he explained the codes and figures, he was not just telling a story, he was verifying a written record of his crimes and his partnership with El Chapo. The ledgers connected the dots between the cocaine production in Colombia and the distribution network in Mexico. They provided tangible proof of the payments, the shipments, and the shared profits. For the jury, this was powerful. It moved the case beyond the word of a confessed murderer and grounded it in the cold, hard data of a criminal mastermind's own obsessive record-keeping. The monster's diary had become his partner's downfall. When it was the defense's turn, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from a grim lecture to a gladiatorial combat. El Chapo's attorney, William Purpura, rose to face Chupeta, his objective clear to dismantle the witness's credibility piece by piece. Purpura's cross-examination was an aggressive, relentless assault on Chupeta's character. He forced the former kingpin to recount his litany of crimes, not as a confession, but as an indictment of his very soul. He made Chupeta repeat his admission of ordering at least 150 murders. He made him confirm that he had lied, cheated, and used fake documents his entire adult life. The goal was to paint Chupeta as a pathological liar, a man whose word was utterly worthless. Purpura masterfully reframed Chupeta's cooperation deal, presenting it to the jury as the ultimate bargain for a mass murderer. He did the grim math for them, pointing out that the 25-year sentence Chupeta hoped for amounted to roughly 60 days of prison time for each of the 150 murders he had ordered. The implication was shocking and effective. Was the testimony of a man who valued a human life at 2 months in prison truly believable? Purpura hammered the point home, asking Chupeta if he thought that was a fair trade. He was trying to sow doubt, to suggest that a man so morally bankrupt would say anything, implicate anyone, including El Chapo, to save himself. The cross-examination was a high-wire act of courtroom theater. Purpura prowled before the witness stand, his questions sharp and accusatory. He forced Chupeta to admit that he had lied to doctors, to government officials, and to his own criminal associates. "You have been deceiving people your entire life. Isn't that correct?" Purpura asked. Chupeta had no choice but to agree. The defense attorney was building a simple but powerful narrative. If this man is a professional liar, why should you believe him now? He is not here for justice. He is here for a deal. He is selling a story, and Joaquin Guzman is the price of his freedom. Even the prosecution struggled at times to rein in their star witness. During her direct examination, prosecutor Andrea Goldberg had to correct Chupeta on multiple occasions. He claimed at one point to have personally sold cocaine in Los Angeles, a detail that would have strengthened his first-hand knowledge of the United States market. However, Goldberg was forced to remind him in front of the jury that he had not set foot in the United States since a 1988 arrest in Miami. It was a small but significant slip, a moment that revealed Chupeta's potential to embellish the truth. It was a crack in his armor that Purpura would later exploit with surgical precision, arguing that the witness's entire testimony was a self-serving fabrication. In the end, the testimony of Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia presented the jury with a profound and unsettling dilemma. They were asked to accept the word of a man who was, by his own admission, a monster. He was a mass murderer, a global drug trafficker, a liar, and a manipulator. Yet, his testimony was crucial to the government's case against El Chapo. His story, filled with violence and betrayal, was supported by the cold, hard evidence of his own meticulous ledgers. The prosecution's case rested on the proposition that even a serpent can tell the truth, especially when its own survival depends on it. The jury had to decide if they could trust the ghoul in the witness box. Chupeta's presence offered a rare and unfiltered glimpse into the apex of the international drug trade. He described a world governed by its own brutal logic, where loyalty was fleeting and violence was the only constant. His partnership with El Chapo was not one of friendship, but of mutual benefit, a business alliance between two titans of crime. He laid bare the mechanics of their operation, from the purity of the cocaine to the logistics of its transport and the grim accounting of the murders required to protect it. He was both the narrator and the embodiment of the story, his disfigured face a constant reminder of the extreme measures required to navigate that world. The courtroom drama surrounding his testimony was a microcosm of the larger war on drugs. It showcased the moral compromises and uneasy alliances that law enforcement must make to pursue figures like El Chapo. To catch a kingpin, they had to make a deal with a killer. The defense's attack on Chupeta's credibility was not just a legal strategy. It was a valid critique of a system that relies on the testimony of the very criminals it seeks to eradicate. The jury was left to weigh the chilling confessions of a man with nothing to lose against the detailed records he obsessively kept when he had an empire to protect. Ultimately, Chupeta's testimony was a chilling performance, a story told for the highest possible stakes. He was testifying for his life, or at least for a life outside the confines of a supermax prison. His detailed account of his 17-year partnership with El Chapo, from the shared profits to the shared culture of violence, provided the prosecution with a powerful narrative. The image of the man with 1,000 faces, recounting his bloody history, would linger long in the minds of the jurors. They were left to ponder a difficult question. How much truth can be found in the testimony of a man who admitted that his entire life was a lie? The price of his testimony was El Chapo's conviction, a price the government was clearly willing to pay.